Hello and welcome to another episode of Plant Culture. In this episode we'll cover a brief cultural history of apples. This will be part 1 of 2 apple culture videos. Let's get started. We'll first start with a talk about the invention of the apple parer. It was invented in 1840 as a device to core apples. You can see an image of what it looks like in the current video. It was at some point introduced to England, and by 1877, it became both popular in the United States and Britain. It is speculated to be invented by Eli Whitney, the inventor of the cotton gin. Another legend says that it was invented by Joseph Stirling of South Woodstock, Vermont, in 1781. And still another legend mentions a 13-year-old Thomas Blanchard of Massachusetts inventing the parer that could core apples. But the earliest known apple parer was created by Daniel Cox in 1785. The first patented apple parer was made by Moses Cotes in 1803. During this exact same time period, the scientific name Malus domestica became the official scientific name for apples. And ironically, it also fell on Valentine's Day. Now on to the history of the American apple. Starting with the colonization period of 1600 to 1800. English colonists introduced the sweet apple and other European fruit trees to North America in the early 17th century. The early apple orchards were planted from seed, with each tree grown being genetically different than its parent plant, many times producing unpalatable apples. These crops were primarily used for making cider and to feed animals. Since water was not reliable in many areas, cider became the mainstay for beverages. They were also used to make many different types of foods, such as vinegars, pies, puddings, fritters, jellies, and marmalades. During this time, the best fruit trees were grafted onto rootstock, and over time mass propagated, and so many new varieties of apple began proliferating throughout North America. One such apple breeder was William Price Sr., who converted his father's private gardens into the first commercial nursery in America. He introduced many European varieties of fruit tree and played a role in both plant breeding, plant propagation, and plant promotion of brand new varieties of apple for that time period. The first apple to gain great attention within that region was the Newton Pippin. It was the first apple to be fully developed for an American climate, as it grew well in the Americas but poorly in Europe. In the 1800s, fewer and fewer new varieties were being bred, and clonally generated varieties of apples were being produced en masse through the process of grafting. In 1803, a book called the Domestic Encyclopedia provided a list of all the apples growing in America at that time, specifically the US. This includes 62 fresh-eating varieties and 17 hard cider varieties, and various breeders were encouraged to generate new varieties to add to this list. During this time was also a rapid increase in exportation of new crops of apples throughout the world. In fact, in 1838, Andrew Stevenson, acting as a representative of the United States, gave Queen Victoria 2 barrels of Newtown Pippins grown in Virginia. The Queen liked these apples so much, the Queen lifted the export tax on imported apples. In 1845, Jackson Downing made an attempt to make a full list of all the apple varieties grown in America. This was revised by his brother Charles Downing in 1869. And this book accounted for 1,099 out of the estimated 1,856 apple varieties grown in America at that time period. During this time, many machines and factories were being built for drying, coring, and selling different apples for different purposes. The 1800s was truly the golden age of sheer quantity of apple variety and apple harvesting machinery. And there's so much infrastructure being built dedicated to the movement of apples and apple-related products. This led to the eventual commercial specialization that would dramatically change the apple industry. Between the ages of 1881 and 1945, there was a transition from an emphasis on breeding and developing new varieties to producing a smaller number of varieties in larger amounts. It's during this time period that the development and use of pesticides became a key element of commercial apple farming alongside new pruning techniques. These commercial orchards reduced the need to plant apple trees near a home, and a flourishing dried apple market for export purposes began increasing. The development of the perfected fruit evaporator in 1870 and 1875 allowed for a rapid increase in the amount of dried apples that could be produced. The graph you see on this video shows the increase on how many dried apples were produced over that time period. Now on to the apples of our present age. After World War II, the general evolution of orchard management changed again, becoming specialized in monocultures containing even fewer varieties of apple that were grafted onto clone dwarf rootstock. And by the 1960s, there were only 10 cultivars dominating the market, 9 winter apple varieties and 1 fall variety, with Red and Golden Delicious being the dominant top 2 varieties, with Red Delicious becoming the most dominant one, producing half of all apples grown by the 1980s. And since the 1980s, concerns about monoculture have created an interest in preserving biodiversity, as well as an attempt to resurrect many old varieties of apples since thousands are now extinct due to lack of propagation and cultivation. Dr. Philip Forslane, the curator of the apple collection at the USDA Plant Genetic Resources Unit in Geneva, New York, has created a system that has preserved 2,500 apple varieties from around the world, 2 clones of each, sort of like a Noah's Ark, but for apples. Dr. Forslane also preserves seeds and cuttings from wild apple trees from Kazakhstan, the genetic origin of apples themselves. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to me on BitChute for a greater variety of content, 4 videos a week. And thank you to all my subscribers on both platforms. I appreciate it.